let's talk about that a little bit. You have 10 kids.
God,
right?
no, I have 10 wonderful kids.
10 wonderful kids. Hey, I know many of them pretty well. Coached some of them in basketball, and just our kids grew up together. My three that were equal
somewhere in between,
somewhere in that spectrum of 10. My three landed, and we had them around a lot, and so that was great. And they are wonderful kids. But I mean, talk about that a little bit, because 10 kids is unusual. I mean, we talked about it earlier, kind of the expectation of get the college degree, get the good job, the house, the 2-car garage, couple of kids. How did you wind up with 10?
Well, Scotty, I'd say Juanita came to the conviction earlier than I did, but we were challenged fairly early in our married life to trust God for our family. And that was scary for me. Again, being in a very limited budget, and then the added complication, not only monetarily of Juanita's having the struggles physically, but circumstantially, how much can she handle? And well-meaning, but perhaps slightly misguided fellow believers who loved us would come along and say, Juanita she probably needs to get her tubes tied. This is taking a toll. And it has, Scotty, it has taken a toll on her body. It has. And yet we look at those 10 kids and what they're doing. You know what? She would say, if I were to ask Juanita, was it worth it in terms of, how things are now and the cost that it has been? There would not be a moment's hesitation. She'd say, yes, it's been worth it. I was glad to do what I've done, and I'm glad for what the kids are doing now.
Right. Well, that's a wonderful testimony, and I'm thankful that we have Juanitas that are willing to. I mean, it's a sacrifice, right? I mean, it is a sacrifice.
Yes.
And it's. I have so much respect. It's not that I don't respect or appreciate what women who are working do. I mean, I see the tremendous challenges they have, the ones that are trying to do multiple things. But the mom who's willing to raise 10 kids, set her own agenda aside for the betterment of others. I mean, that is something that we should herald in this society. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Why do we look down on those? I mean, that is a tremendous... I mean, we should put them on a pedestal. I know they don't want a pedestal necessarily, but we need to give them their due.
Well, Scotty, forgive me if I'm getting off course here a little bit, but, if I were to say, what was Art Pinzur's greatest hour? When my youngest son, Jeremiah, graduated from high school, unbeknownst to my wife, I had prepared a plaque for her. And I told the folks at the graduation, just give me a spot 5 minutes. And I got up and basically told folks, we've just recognized 12 graduates who put in 18 years of learning. And I said, I would be grossly remiss if I didn't recognize someone who spent the last 39 years, giving an education to 10 children. I proceeded to, pull out this plaque and read it to her, and she's kind of crying.
Absolutely.
And without my even having to prompt folks, by the time I finished, they were giving her a standing ovation. And I thought, yes, that's what we need to do for these kind of moms. They deserve a standing ovation.
Absolutely. They
need to be encouraged that they've made good choices.
Well, they absolutely do. And this is a bit of a rabbit for what we want to talk about. But the truth is, like you said, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. Our society is coming apart at the seams, right? And don't you have to trace it back a little bit to what's happening at home with those moms, the time, the care, the teaching? I mean, it all goes back to the home.
Yes.
For sure.
Basic building block of society.
Yeah, absolutely.
The family is deteriorating, society is going to deteriorate.
Yeah, it seems pretty straightforward and simple, but we somehow seem to be missing it, unfortunately. Yeah, so with the 10 kids, obviously, as the kind of things that I hear with that many kids are, I can never afford that many. Oh, I can't handle that many. There's all kinds of things that come to mind with that. What would you advise people on how many kids should they have, or how do they handle more than 2 kids? And what about the financial aspects of that? I mean, what do you tell people?
when Paul complained about his thorn in the flesh, God's answer to him was, "My grace is sufficient for you." Scotty, when we were living in the Chicago suburbs, we were interacting with another delightful couple from church. And they had one girl and they had a second girl. And just in terms of interacting with our family and talking with Juanita got kind of close with her. They decided, you know what? We're going to trust God with our family. You know how many more children God gave them?
0.
You know, do we trust God or not?
Right.
Does God know how many to give us? And now, Scotty, I want to be careful because we recognize certain people have, physical issues or medical concerns that are legitimate.
Sure.
So obviously we want them to be sensitive to God. We want them to seek godly counsel from a pastor or other friends. So I don't know that I can be, I don't want to be overly adamant in
Sure.
our situation. My wife was fairly fertile, The kids kept coming.
Right.
And even my unbelieving dad, we did have one miscarriage. And when we told him, and of course he thought we were a little bit crazy. Every time he heard that, Juanita was expecting, he thought, oy vey esmir, how are they going to afford this? When we broke the news to him that she had miscarried, my dad cried. He cried. He was so looking forward to that child. It's
Right.
as if he had changed his mindset as well. You asked about finances. Scotty, it may sound overly simplistic, but you know what? When Jesus said, seek, even as an unbeliever, I first read the Sermon on the Mount, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these other practical necessities will be added to you. Even as an unbeliever, when I read those words, I thought to myself, you know what? There is something, that has got to be true. If my priorities are right, somehow I've got to believe this is going to work out.
Right.
Is God incapable of providing for what he brings into the world? As he brought children along to us, he provided for us. Okay, did we drive the old beat up kind of nasty looking van? Yes, we did. But you know what? My kids have such fond memories of those old nasty beat up vans and, having to call each other, 3 rows apart. Hey, Moses, pass me this. We'd be traveling, long distance, and the family would be singing or, telling jokes. And again, another dynamic, people would say, how do you give enough love if you got so many kids? Scotty, I think there's an unusual and maybe divine economy there. On the one hand, you ache a little bit over, I just don't give, this particular child as much as this other family would give one of their 2 or 3 children. But you know what? There is a cohesiveness, at least in my home, in my family, there is a cohesiveness among our children. Some of them are not believers. So it isn't like they all think the same way and believe the same way.
Right.
But there is such a sense of caring and love and appreciation for one another. It's like, that's priceless.
Absolutely.
So in a sense, what we couldn't give them, they've been able to give one another.
Well, I think what you just said, that cohesiveness is priceless. And I think that's where we miss the mark because we don't understand cost versus value, right? Because so many people make the decision on family size based on finances, right? And I understand the thinking behind that, but it's a very rational thought that does not take into account the things that you can't put a value on, right? You can't put a value on family cohesiveness, of the joy that comes from that family bond, that family, riding in the van and singing and telling the jokes and experiencing things. And I don't even know how to describe it, but there's, I wish I was a little more articulate on that, but there's, you just can't put a value on that. I've seen it play out. We only had 3. We, hindsight, we wish we had had more, but even with our 3, the times that we have had, it is truly priceless, right? And so is having more kids a financial
challenge,
a financial sacrifice? Absolutely. Does your financial, let me put it this way, your financial standard of living may have to be reduced, but your standard of living doesn't have to be reduced. You know what I'm saying? It may go the other direction as far as the amount of love that you have, the joy that you share, the experiences that you have, those things do not get diminished. Yes, your checkbook may get diminished, but those other things do not, is what I have seen. And so I really wish people would consider that. Love is one of those things that, I remember, even though we didn't have as many, we had Hannah. She was our oldest, and then you got Jacob was our next coming along, and you're like, okay, can I love him as much as I love the first one? And you realize there's no limit to love. It's not like you got a pie, and if you give Hannah so many this piece, then that only leaves Jacob this much. No, they all get the full pie, And so I wish people could see that and feel that, and maybe maybe having 10 is not for everybody, but maybe 4 or 5 might be good.
Well, and Scotty, I would say if I had waited till I felt like I was really ready, mature enough, and financially capable of supporting a child, honestly, I probably would never have any. Just like if I'd waited till I was mature enough and really ready to take on a wife, I probably never would have married.
Right, exactly.
But the thing is, God grows you up. All those years that we were home educating you, you think you're teaching your kids. God's teaching you. This is a school of character for you, the parent.
Right.
And it's it can be tough. It can be very challenging. You're going to want to cry and pull your hair out at times.
Right.
It's humbling. But you know what? God is teaching you, and God is growing you up as well.
Right. Well, and as you said, we're not ever ready for those things. It is those things that grow us up, that mature us, that turn us into the people that ultimately we become, hopefully more godly as we go along. So anyway, anything else you would share with potential parents, or maybe people who have started a family? Just any other words along those lines? Well,
Scotty, that I think the consistent testimony of Scripture is that children are a blessing.
Amen.
And everywhere you see barrenness is kind of viewed as a curse, And again, for those who can't have children, no, I'm not saying you're under God's curse, but, to purposely prevent having children just does not seem to be consistent with God's standard. What was God's very first commandment to mankind? Be fruitful and I don't see where God has ever revoked or rescinded that commandment. And He knows how many to give you. He knows what you need.
Right.
Do we trust Him?